Chinese president. Xi Jinping in major line of fire. Xi reprimanded by elders. China's economy slowing down. Real estate sector collapsing. Military meltdown in rocket force. Xi's G20 insecurity, now big headline. That is our top focus on India Today.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping is in the line of fire in Beijing. Xi Jinping, as President of China, head of the Central Military Commission and the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, is considered the most powerful man in China after Chairman Mao. However, a report in Nikkei Asia claims Xi Jinping got an unprecedented reprimand from party elders for the Chinese economy being in tailspin, the collapse of the real estate sector, and the purge in PLA rocket force. The report also suggests Xi Jinping is staying away from the G20 summit because he fears tough questions on the Chinese economy. And that's our top story.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is in the line of fire at home. Considered the most powerful leader in China after Chairman Mao, Xi Jinping, according to a report in Nikkei Asia, was reprimanded by elders of the Chinese Communist Party over the economic situation in China and rising joblessness. The elders, led by former Vice President Zheng Qinghong, made their displeasure very clear. The report says the Communist Party fears it could face unprecedented threat to its rule if the turmoil continues. This is the first time that the Chinese president, who is also the head of the Central Military Commission and the General Secretary of the Communist Party, has faced this kind of wrath of the elders.
At the core of what is happening in China is that the people don't trust their government. So the most significant statistic I've seen about the Chinese economy is that in the last 5 or 7 years, household savings have gone up 50%. In other words, people are putting their money in savings accounts. Effectively, they're hiding it in mattresses. Why? Because they don't believe the government will be able to handle the real estate situation. They don't believe the government will be able to handle the debt overhang. And most importantly, they don't believe the government is being honest with them.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is also in the line of fire for trouble in China's elite rocket force after a purge of top generals. In the first week of August, President Xi Jinping dismissed 2 of the senior-most generals in the People's Liberation Army rocket force, which oversees China's land-based missile and nuclear arsenal, reportedly on allegations of corruption. The double whammy of troubled economy and purge in the rocket force has hit Chinese morale.
चीन एक देश के रूप में एक विस्तारवादी देश है, हमेशा नेगेटिव डिप्लोमेसी का प्रयोग करता है और आज सिर्फ अमेरिका ही नहीं, पूरा विश्व इस बात को मान रहा है कि G20 जैसे जो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मंच हैं वहां शिरकत ना करके या जब एक कंसेंसस बन रही होती है किसी मुद्दे को लेकर के उसमें शामिल ना होकर के चीन इस तरह के मंचों को हतोत्साहित करने का काम करता है.
Sluggish economy and declining foreign investment are not President Xi Jinping's only troubles, according to the report. President Xi is seen to be skipping the G20 summit in India to avoid losing face. He fears China's economy and need for rules-based order may be discussed at the summit, where he may increasingly feel isolated in the meeting of democracies. Xi Jinping fears facing tough questions on the Chinese economy. To add to China's troubles, there has been no breakthrough in the stalled talks with the United States, despite the visit of US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Xi Jinping not coming for the G20 summit clearly puts China in the dock. Bureau Report, India Today.
Chinese Communist Party elders told President Xi Jinping, according to this report, that the party could face unprecedented threat to its rule if this turmoil continues in China. So Xi Jinping clearly not in control of the situation. China's real estate sector, that's in a shambles. Youth unemployment rate is apparently so alarmingly high that China stopped putting out numbers. Trade is sluggish, foreign investment is declining. Another major worry for China, no breakthrough in trade talks with the United States of America or boundary talks with India. US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, she traveled to China, but according to analysts, no gifts for China from this visit. No concessions from India on border talks with China either. So Xi Jinping increasingly appears to be isolated and cornered.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, in his third term, will give the G20 summit in New Delhi a miss.
各位记者朋友，大家下午好，欢迎出席今天。
At the invitation of India, Premier of the State Council Li Xiang will attend the 18th G20 summit held in New Delhi.
明年
Instead, his next big global appearance would be the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. This would also be his first absence from a G20 summit since taking charge in 2012. China is cornered on its own turf, as much as it is at the receiving end of the Western bloc led by the USA. Xi Jinping has a big economic crisis on his hands. In the summer of 2023, graduating Chinese students flooded social media with images of them posing as corpses. Others appeared to bin their graduation thesis in an act of despair. Unemployment rate of educated youth in China soared to 21.4% in June, when the 11.6 million newly minted college students were poised to enter the job market. The Chinese real estate sector is grappling with staggering losses. Banks are facing sluggish growth, and manufacturing activity has been shrinking for months. China's largest developer, Country Garden, posted a $6.7 billion loss for the first half of 2023. Country Garden's debt is reportedly above $150 billion. Another major Chinese developer, Evergrande Group, is also struggling. The company is reportedly laden with over $300 billion in debt, posting a total of $81 billion in losses for 2021 and 2022. Additionally, it reported a further loss of $4.53 billion for the first 6 months of this year. That's not all. Data of the National Bureau of Statistics indicates that the manufacturing sector in China contracted for the 5th consecutive month in August. World's largest bank by total assets, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China Limited and the Bank of China both posted sluggish profit growth for the first half of 2023. And Xi needs to stoke all these jarred nerves. He did so with his BRICS summit domination in Johannesburg in August. Belt and Road Forum is his pet project, so October is his golden opportunity. The G20 summit in New Delhi under India's presidency does not exactly sit neatly in the scheme of things for Xi Jinping. Because G20 will raise uncomfortable questions like Chinese aggression against Taiwan and South China Sea. It's bonhomie with Moscow at a time when the Western world is unitedly standing by Ukraine.
I am disappointed, but I'm going to get to see it.
China has officially claimed that it attaches great importance to the G20 summit and hopes for better global cooperation resolution coming out of it. But it looks like that the rise of India and its global stature is making Xi Jinping uncomfortable. Bureau Report, India Today.
So what are ground realities in Beijing? The Nikkei report insists unprecedented reprimand for Xi Jinping over state of economy. Xi Jinping fears he will be questioned on economy if he comes for G20. Let's try and make sense of some of these developments. Sushant Sareen is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. He joins me on the show. Sushant Sareen, what do you make of this report? Because Xi Jinping appears to have skipped G20 to avoid losing face. China's apprehension is democracies may question China on the state of economy, and Xi Jinping fears being isolated in this powerful group of democracies and economies.
So Gaurav, the journalist who filed this report is somebody with long years of experience, very good contacts. So I would imagine that this is a credible report. This is not a propaganda report. And quite clearly, all the numbers and all the other information coming out of China suggests that all is not well inside the Middle Kingdom. And there is growing pressure on Xi Jinping. Of course, today's report tells us that it's coming from within the party, from strong factions within the party. There is growing opposition. That does not mean that Xi Jinping's position in China is shaky or there is any threat to him, any imminent threat to him. But it does mean that now the voices against him are growing. People are warning him, not because these are reformers or any such thing, but because they feel that if the current trajectory or downward trajectory continues, then the party's dominance over China will come into question. So there is that pressure which is growing, and there's very little reason to doubt it. Again, on the economic front, the real estate sector, that bubble is bursting, and the debt overhang on the real estate sector, I don't know how they are going to be able to manage it, given the other problems which are already existing in the Chinese economy. As far as the G20 is concerned,
it's not. Okay, I'll just come to G20 in a moment. It's not just the Chinese economy. Last week, there were reports of a purge in China's rocket force, top generals being removed, serious charges of corruption being leveled against top generals, and the buck again, as you know better, Sushant Sareen, stops with President Xi Jinping. He's the Central Military Commission's head and the force behind the rocket force.
Not only that, he is also the person who's believed to have appointed and selected these officials, posted them out there, and then suddenly, he has had to sack them for reasons of corruption. But that corruption could also mean something much more sinister. And it's not just these two guys from the rocket force. He virtually handpicked the foreign minister, who within weeks he had to sack. So, questions are going to be raised and are probably being raised in that opaque system on the kind of choices Xi Jinping is making. So clearly that is also adding a lot of political pressure to the growing economic pressures which are already there in the Chinese system. But again, anybody who's predicting the demise of China or the collapse of China or the collapse of the Chinese economy, I think those are highly exaggerated. We have to recognize that the Chinese economy has strengths. But yes, there is this looming crisis, and it won't be easy for the Chinese to come out of it.
So now let's talk about the G20. It's an $18 trillion economy that chooses to stay away. Would you look at it as as a snub to India, $3.75 trillion economy, or is this fear or apprehension, as this report seems to make out, that powerful democracies, the United States, India, perhaps some European countries, Australia, they will push back against an expansionist China and seek a rules-based order?
Gaurav, quite clearly, even as far as the G20 is concerned, you can sense the growing isolation of China, which used to be the toast of G20 as the largest or the fastest growing economy in the world, a kind of a growth engine for the rest of the global economy. You've seen, that romance of China die down. You've seen the growing isolation of Xi Jinping. You've seen a major pushback coming from other economies, coming from other big countries which are, getting into strategic contestation with the Chinese. You are seeing that the Chinese are being pushed into a corner. We have also seen that the Chinese alliance with the Russians, for example, hasn't really added any real weight to China as far as the global economic system is concerned. So there are issues on that front. On the India front, there have been some reports. Again, I cannot, vouch for the veracity of these reports, but there have been some reports that Xi Jinping wanted some concessions on the LSE from Mr. Modi, and in exchange, he would grace, and I say this with all the sarcasm I can muster, he would grace India with his presence. I don't think any Indian gives a damn whether Xi Jinping comes or not, and clearly he overshot. He thought that we were going to be falling over them ourselves so that he would come to India. We don't give a damn whether he comes to India or not. So clearly, Mr. Modi didn't bite.
Yes, shouldn't he have seen the writing on the wall after India held a virtual SCO that India wouldn't give Beijing a platform, and that's why a virtual SCO summit was held where India again was the chair? Are there serious illusions of grandeur when it comes to Xi Jinping, his assessment of a situation? He thought he could browbeat India despite Mamalapuram, and Wuhan bonhomie, and that didn't happen. India pushed back. Democracies, are they really pushing back? What do you make of, U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo's visit to China, and China seeing no gift in that trip?
So, just to correct you, Gaurav, it's not illusions of grandeur, it's delusions of grandeur in the case of Mr. Xi Jinping, quite clearly. And I think if he actually thought that there would be some gift from India's side, he was badly advised, or, he simply doesn't understand how the rest of the world functions. Number one. Number two, the same would apply to the Americans as well. I think the Chinese have seen the American keenness to engage with the Chinese to try and solve or sort out some of the rough edges which have come into the relationship, at least at the economic level. They've seen it as American weakness. And so they expect that, well, if the Americans engage with them, they can push the Americans and extract concessions. That's not happened. And clearly, that was also a kind of a setback to the Chinese, because they thought that, okay, fine, if the Americans are so keen, maybe, we can push them hard enough and they'll give in. That has not happened. And there is a major pushback coming from the American side. I think what the Americans are doing is taking a leaf out of the Chinese playbook, which is to talk softly but carry a big stick. And we are seeing signs of that big stick in the kind of alliances and partnerships that the Americans are striking around the world, and particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. So clearly that is something which is also spooking the Chinese.
Okay. Sushant Sareen, for joining me here, many thanks. And we will, over the next several days, continue to talk about China facing these very serious headwinds and India growing on the world stage. G20 is India's moment. And it's not just G20. Yes, India is working very hard. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, his entire team. Remember, the Prime Minister also heads to ASEAN and East Asia Summit. India very successfully, one, pushing back against China, two, emerging as the voice of the developing world and taking them along instead of China that actually bullies developing countries and virtually beats them into submission the way it tried almost successfully with Pakistan and a little successfully with countries like Sri Lanka. But we will track this story very, very closely. That is all I have for you on this special broadcast. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.
मैं हूं सना और आज मैं आपको मिलाने वाली हूं बॉलीवुड सुपरस्टार से। लेकिन पहले देखते हैं उनकी आने वाली फिल्म की झलकियां।
ये तो शुरुआत है। गुड टू गो गर्ल्स।
रेडी चीफ।
हाय, मैं हूं शाहरुख खान। आपके लिए लेकर आया हूं मेरी नई फिल्म जवान, और मेरे साथ हैं आज तक एआई।
थैंक यू शाहरुख। अच्छा बताइए, मुझ में और आप में कौन सी बात कॉमन है?
वैसे तो बहुत कुछ होगा, लेकिन आप बताइए ना।
चलिए मैं बता देती हूँ। शाहरुख खान और मुझ में ये बात कॉमन है कि हम दोनों हमेशा जवान रहेंगे।
बिल्कुल। वैसे एक और बात कॉमन है।
कौन सी?
आप सब ने दोनों का नाम तो सुना होगा।
थैंक यू शाहरुख। वैसे आपका चार्म देखकर तो मेरे एआई दिल में भी कुछ कुछ होता है। और हाँ, आई एम ऑल्सो 100% रेडी फॉर जवान विद द किंग खान 7 सितंबर को आपके नजदीकी सिनेमा घरों में।
आर यू रेडी?
अगर इतना इंग्रेज के खिलाफ और इंग्रेज की गुलामी की चलते बीजेपी पार्टी को इतना बुरा लगते तो ये राष्ट्रपति भवन को त्याग करना चाहिए अभी इसी वक्त, क्योंकि वो जो राष्ट्रपति भवन वो वाइसरॉय के हाउस थे। लॉर्ड आर्विन पहले इसका बासिंदा थे। माउंटबेटन और सारे अंग्रेजों की ये वाइसरॉय हाउस थे। आजादी के बाद ये प्रेसिडेंट हाउस हुई। तो पहले उसको त्याग करना चाहिए। नॉर्थ ब्लॉक साउथ ब्लॉक को त्याग करना चाहिए। सब भारत बना दो, सब खाली करा दो पहले ही, और जरूरत पड़े तो गोला दागो और उड़ा दो।
भारत जो है वो हमारी संस्कृति, हमारे संस्कार की आत्मा है, और हमारी संस्कृति और संस्कार पर जो विदेशी आक्रमणकारियों ने चोट की थी, निश्चित तौर से उनकी हमारे देश के प्रति जो नियत थी उसमें खोट थी। नरेंद्र मोदी जी को तो मैं बधाई देता हूँ, और आज पूरा देश इस बात को गर्वान्वित है कि उन्होंने जो हमारे ये जो जुल्म और जुर्म हमारे देश की पहचान के साथ हुआ था, हमारे संस्कार और संस्कृति के साथ हुआ था, उसको वो करेक्ट करने की दिशा में आगे बढ़ रहे हैं।
Welcome to the special broadcast on India Today. I'm Akshita Anantagopal. We're in G20 week, and I know a lot of you are wondering what's the big fuss about the national capital, about how Delhi is changed. I'm here at the IGI airport, as you can see. I'm going to be taking the route that our G20 world leaders are taking to show you how much things have changed. If you've ever been to Delhi, get set, because you're not going to recognize half of the roads that I'm about to show you. Obviously, it'll be a lot less crowded for our world leaders, but I'll do the best I can to show you what their experience is going to be like going through Delhi. Let's go. India's culture, India's tradition, India's beauty, all being displayed on the streets of the national capital. As I'm heading closer and closer to the Bharat Mandapam, which is where the actual G20 summit will be held, here's what people, delegates who are traveling through the streets of Delhi will see. These kind of murals have been put up in several underbridges on the walls. You see this depiction here of the Mahabharata. On my left, different dance forms from across the country, from Bharatanatyam to Kathakali to Kuchipudi. I see so many others as well, all depicted here. And what's wonderful to see, which I keep highlighting, is that they've taken the beauty of every single state and highlighted it as part of G20. Let me show you something, and we'll go around here because I don't want you to miss out on the other aspect also of what has been covered in this particular portion. On this side of the underbridge, where you see some traffic also going through, there's a depiction of the Ramayana. There's Lord Ram, Lord Hanuman, Lakshman and Goddess Sita, all of whom are projected right here in this particular mural that's been put up here. I'm not sure if I can see it clearly, but yes, you can see all of them present here. Goddess Sita is not there, but yes, this is the Ramayana portrayal that's been shown in this particular spot. Beautiful, beautiful murals that adorn every part of Delhi. But these particular areas where, you know, a story of India's culture, a story of India's tradition is all being shown. I don't know whether I should say India or Bharat, but yes, this is what in fact is seen on the way to Pragati Maidan. I'm very close to Bharat Mandapam, but look at these beautiful murals.
It's always fun to see one of your favorite celebrities become a showstopper for these couturiers, and a lot of Bollywood made its way to the Couture Week this year in Delhi. Right from Ranbir Kapoor to Bhumi Pednekar, Ananya Pandey, Kiara Advani, Vani Kapoor, you name it, and they grace the runway. Here is all the celebrity action.
The 16th edition of India Couture Week, organized by FTCI, saw Bollywood celebrities turn showstoppers. Right from Ranbir Kapoor to Kiara Advani, one saw a plethora of celebrities spruce up the runway.
I feel like a golden girl. I feel very glamorous, but I also feel very comfortable, and I always have a great time working with Rimzim. And it's always there's lots of chaotic energy at Fashion Week, but somehow I managed to keep my calm, I think.
It's a beautiful, beautiful embroidered jacket, and they decided to go without the shirt with this really interesting tie. They have a nice little emblem on it, and I think it's elegant and cool and suave and new all at once.
It feels like it's just growing on my body, the textile, the fabric. It's so sexy. I love the way it hugs my curves. It just makes me feel strong, like I can conquer anything.
It's about imagination coming to life. Literally about imagination coming to life. And for that, I mean, just look at this. We can literally sit here and stare at it.
While the focus is never on the celebrities, but the celebration of art and craft in India, it never really hurts to see celebrities glam up the runway. Indian influencers spruced up the front rows. Bahar Dhawan to Sukhneet Wadhwa, there were plenty of them adding glamour.
So, I mean, I was like literally like, oh my God, what a moment for us. Such great designs, the intricate work, absolutely stunning collection.
In New Delhi with Riya Modi, Lifestyle Bureau, India Today.
The new world order starts here, and a rising India is leading the way. A new template for a changing world.
India in the front seat for global peace and prosperity as world leaders line up for the big event.
India Today gives you the only ringside view. The faces, the voices, the big news breaks. Unrivaled build-up to the G20 summit.
Namaste G20. Continuing coverage only on India Today TV.
Hello and welcome. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching this special episode of the Business Today show. The G20 summit is being seen as India's moment and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's push for a new world order. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister gave his first interview on the G20 to Business Today. The conversation focused on India's presidency and the agenda as 20 of the world's most powerful leaders converge on Delhi. As president of the group, which commands 85% of the world's economy, Prime Minister Modi is looking at India being a catalytic agent for a new global order.
Less than 12 hours to go before global leaders start flying into New Delhi for the G20 summit. The Indian capital has been beautified. Renovation work being carried out at a frenetic pace across the city is nearing climax. All for the G20 summit this weekend. It's a mega event which will showcase India as an emerging economic superpower, with recent data and reports hailing it as a force to reckon with. And it is this resurgent India which was the centerpiece of the exclusive Business Today interview with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister spoke at length about the impact of India's G20 presidency on the global ecosystem. In a no-holds-barred conversation with the top editorial team of Rahul Kanwal, Siddharth Zarabi and Saurabh Majumdar, the Prime Minister laid out the enabling role India is playing on a range of issues. The big takeaways from the over 40-minute interview is the way G20 has changed under India's leadership. To emerge as the voice of often sidelined Global South, according to the Prime Minister, the summit will bring developed and developing countries together for the first time. to find solutions to global problems. The Prime Minister has also pushed for the inclusion of the African Union into the G20, emphasizing that India and India's G20 will act as a catalytic agent for the new global order. And India is combining its G20 presidency with its growing economic clout to make its tryst with history. The task is difficult and fraught with urgent issues that require global attention. Countries across the world are trying to repair the damage from the twin shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. The world is also adjusting to a new normal of slower growth, higher inflation, widening socio-economic disparities, and extreme weather-related events. According to the Prime Minister, the G20 is being looked at as a ray of hope by the world. The ground for this is being laid during India's G20 presidency. The Prime Minister warned that there are forces taking undue advantage by catalyzing the debt crisis and capitalizing on the helplessness of other countries and leading them into debt traps. This is being addressed under India's presidency via debt restructuring and helped countries like Sri Lanka, Zambia, Ethiopia and Ghana. The exclusive interaction at the Prime Minister's sprawling, tastefully done-up office in 7 Lok Kalyan Marg had the Prime Minister dressed immaculately and looking relaxed. He spoke passionately about the opportunity India has to help address areas of global concern, India as a potential manufacturing hub, and much more. The PM exuded confidence that India was ready for the next phase of economic growth.
आज भारत बड़े लक्ष्य तय कर रहा है.
He listed out the mantras which he felt will power this next wave. Vocal for global, Atmanirbhar Bharat, zero deficit and zero effect among others. Adding that global manufacturers were coming to India, unfolding an era of unprecedented job creation. According to the Prime Minister, domestic consumption remains strong and with every indicator looking up. Economic growth was bound to be strong. With companies like Tesla lining up for an entry into the Indian market and Apple raising its bets on India, the Prime Minister highlighted the effectiveness of the ease of doing business measures taken by the government in the past few years, saying that massive investments by these companies showed the increasing attractiveness of India as the manufacturing destination. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
And joining me to discuss this is Gautam Chikarmane, Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation. We're also joined by Ambassador J.K. Tripathi, Subhash Garg, former Finance Secretary and a senior policymaker, also on the show with us, Saurabh Majumdar, Editor of Business Today. Welcome to the show. Saurabh, I'm going to come to you first to quickly set the context for our viewers. The key takeaway as far as the economics of the G20 is concerned that we understood during our interview with the Prime Minister. Saurabh.
Thank you, Siddharth. You were with me and we had a pretty 40-minute plus long meeting with the Prime Minister. And it was a very relaxed Prime Minister. We saw a person who was clearly in control of the situation. He was looking forward to the G20 summit and he was explaining to us what are the key contours of how he sees this G20 summit playing out. Now, one of the key elements he says is very dear to him, which is that he wants India now to be the voice of the global south. And that's something he has stressed repeatedly in the course of the interview, Siddharth, as you know, in the sense that he says whether it is the reform of the multilateral development banks, whether it is generally taking forward the development agenda of the world in a sense, he wants India to be at the front and center of this and be the link between the developed and developing nations. And he says this whole Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the slogan which he has coined for this particular G20, what he's talking about in this interview, he says there is no Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam if we do not carry the developing world with us.
Gautam Chikarmane, Vasudev Kutumbakam and China having problems with that. Given the politics, and we'll leave that aside for on today's show, will the G20, in your view, Gautam, help global business look afresh at India? Once again, it's not as if global business is not in India, but will it sort of reaffirm the relationship between global investors and India as an investment destination?
I think in India as an investment destination, or the fact that FDI is coming in, or the fact that India is likely to become a large market, is a future that has already happened. G20 will only further consolidate it. The fact that companies are coming, FDI is at its highest. Even FII, which is foreign institutional investments, are at a highest. India is the growth story. Wherever you look, it is the fastest growing economy. It has been for the past few years, and it is likely to be so for the next few years. So I don't see India getting out. By the way, 40% of the global growth is going to come from India. So despite being only a $3.3 trillion economy, India is punching way above its weight in global affairs. Having said that, India is not an easy place to do business. The biggest problem of corruption, etc., remains. But I don't think G20 can do very much. In fact, Siddharth, G20 is an ultra macro institution. I don't think a specific company will get any takeaway, a direct takeaway from G20.
Okay, before I go to the other two guests on the panel, I want to bring to you viewers a small slice of a conversation that we had earlier with the G20 Sherpa, Amitabh Kant, at the Business Today India at 100 Summit, and then I'm going to go to my other guests.
One is when G20 started in 2008, the developed world was contributing over about 75% of the global GDP. The developing countries were contributing only about 24-25%. If you look at it now, the share of the developed world has come down very radically. It's about 55%. The share of the developing countries has increased very substantially. So the share of the developing countries is going up, the share of developing countries is coming down. What is happening is, as the IMF has rightly said, this year 80% of the global growth is going to come from the global south countries. The global south is going to contribute to 80% of the growth. And in the next 2 decades, two-third, and it's quite incredible, two-thirds of the growth is going to come from global south.
That was the G20 Sherpa talking about the economic part that we need to focus on. And Ambassador Tripathi, coming to you as someone who's seen foreign policy being made, one of the key things of foreign policy is economic heft. Clearly, India has a lot of economic heft, but will that heft translate into achieving some of the ambitious objectives that we have set for ourselves? Debt relief, for example, the reform of the multilateral banking system. What do you yourself expect, Ambassador Tripathi?
Well, I think there are a few things that India can think of, which India will take from this. One is from multilateral banking. Yes, we might be able to pursue the world that instead of big banks or monopolizing banks like US banks, maybe a small type of banks. Floating a small type of banks might be a better idea. Second thing is, which I feel is more important, is the digital financing, digital transactions, which India is a champion of. Right now, only I think less than 50 nations use digital transactions, and we can probably pitch in here to pursue to have some sort of system by which we can increase this dependence on digital transactions. Third thing is maybe startups combined with international collaborations so that they can share knowledge, and maybe with the help of startups we can achieve better economic growth globally. So that's what I think.
Okay, Subhash Garg, I'm coming to you now, and the question is very simple and try and make it easy for our audience. Will the G20 summit, especially happening in India and the amount of time that we have invested in this presidency, can it help improve our trade and opportunities and the investment opportunities in the broader context?
In respect to the economic agenda, the Indian presidency put out certain things very clearly, that they want the multilateral institutions to be further capitalized. They wanted some agreement on debt relief, because a good part of the world is facing the high indebtedness. They also thought that the digital payments is one area where the world cooperation can enhance. There was also some talk about cryptocurrency and all. So these are, to my mind, the specific agendas which the government of India wanted to sort of pursue and take forward through the G20 India presidency.
We'll come back to that, but time for a short break. We'll be back. Stay tuned in.
Officially, as per the Article 2 of the Constitution of India, we are officially Bharat, and our another name is India. We are Bharat. We were Bharat. The name of our motherland were Bharat. It is Bharat. It will be Bharat. But you have a
Actually, in documents, are we going to see a
document? Article 2 of the Constitution of India. I am reading from document. India, that is Bharat. That is the bullet word.
The opposition says you're worried. India alliance worried you.
India alliance mean what? India alliance का साथ भारत का क्या संबंध? What is the relation between India alliance and भारत? उसमें डरने का क्या है? Why we need to panic?
रिपब्लिक ऑफ भारत करने की क्या जरूरत है? रिपब्लिक भाषा तो इंग्लिश ब्रिटिशों की भाषा है, इंग्लिश भाषा। तो महामहिम आप भारत क्यों नहीं कहते? महामहिम भारत क्यों नहीं कहते आप? आधा अंग्रेज, आधा भारतीय, ये क्यों आपको लगता है अच्छा होगी? मुझे ये लगता है इंडिया नाम से आप डरे हुए हैं। प्रधानमंत्री खुद इंडिया नाम से डरे हुए हैं। और आप थोड़ा गौर करके देखो कि जिस दिन से इंडिया नामक गठबंधन बने हैं हमारा देश में, मोदी जी की नफरत इंडिया के खिलाफ बढ़ते गए हैं।
However, there's some bad news for India's high flyers. Airlines in India will soon be increasing airfares after the government jacked aviation fuel prices up by 14% effective today. Even as LPG prices were reduced earlier this week, airlines have found themselves at the receiving end, with ATF prices raised by nearly 14,000 rupees per kiloliter. This is the steepest hike ever and the third hike in a row. With global prices firming up, ATF prices have risen by 22,116 rupees in the past 3 months. Airlines are expected to pass on this increase to customers by raising the airfares right at the doorstep of the festive season. Karishma Sudani now joins us for more details on this. Karishma, what impact are you really seeing of this move on airfares, especially as the festive season is soon approaching?
Well, right, OMCs have announced this 14% hike in its jet fuel, which is the aviation turbine fuel. In fact, it is on the 1st of every month that they do revise their rates as per the international crude oil prices, which have been quite on a high, thus impacting this mega rise of 14%. We spoke to certain airlines, and on off-record source basis, airline officials have shared with us that a hike in ATF will not directly impact a hike, expected hike in airfares, because though there is an increase in the operational input cost, the tariffs cannot just be worked out or revised as per one of these components or elements. But however, since the festive season is fast approaching and it's the season of long weekends, airlines are expecting that there could be a further uptick in terms of the airfares because of the higher demand.
Welcome back to the Business Today special on the G20. Let's now hear what Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had to say about the economic agenda of the G20.
Global financial ecosystem and responsible financial ecosystem cannot happen, again, without global collaboration. Multilateral development banks and their reforms are also being discussed, and high-level expert group's recommendations are being discussed in the G20 under India's presidency. Similarly, global debt distress. Countries are in deep distress, not just less developed countries, but middle-income countries as well. That affects the global financial architecture as well. Even discussions on debt distress under Indian presidency are happening in the G20.
What the Finance Minister really is telling us, viewers, is that the key priorities are centered around certain issues on which we don't know what the possibility of an agreement will be. Gautam, I'm coming back to you. There is some doubt that the Ukraine conflict could derail some of the important economic items that the Finance Minister and India has been pushing through this G20 process. Be that as it may, do you yourself expect some movement forward on the key economic part of the agenda?
Yeah, I think the conversations will go on. For instance, the reform of multilateral agencies, which is an idea that began in 2008 itself, when Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister had floated that we need the reforms of IMF and World Bank. The fact that it is still at an asking stage and not a reformed stage shows that over the past that many years, nothing has changed. So there will be further push, but that's it. Of course, between 2008 and today, a lot of water has passed and India has a far larger clout. But that doesn't mean it can push its way through. It will have to persuade. Persuasion to persuade whom? It will have to persuade United States and it will have to persuade China. These are the two, United States in particular. Will the United States go back and open out? They have made sounds to that effect. Will other countries be able to finance and increase their share in these multilateral institutions? Right. I have my reservations on that. India is ready, but I'm not sure if other countries are. So I think these reforms of the multilateral, agencies will continue, right. And I don't think we are going to see any conclusion in the Delhi communique.
Okay, Ambassador Tripathi, do you share that view that Gautam Chikkarmane just expressed?
Yes, I do, because I don't think it is going to be that easy to do whatever they are expecting. I mean, it's not a magic